On the night of November 10, 1976, a routine shift at Talavera La Real Air Force Base in Badajoz, Spain, turned into something out of a nightmare. 3 soldiers stationed on guard suddenly found themselves facing an event that defied all logic. It started out as a simple disturbance in the darkness, but what followed would shake them to their core. One soldier, seemingly paralyzed by an invisible force, was rendered unable to move, trapped in place as strange lights appeared in the sky. The airbase, usually quiet, erupted into chaos as military personnel launched a desperate search, scouring the grounds for answers well into the night. Yet, the deeper they looked, the more shit got fucked up. What exactly happened at Talavera La Real that night? Why was one soldier immobilized? And how did this incident lead to a flood of questions that remain unanswered to this day? The truth, it seems, may still be out there, shrouded in mystery. The Badajoz UFO encounter is considered one of the most detailed and dramatic cases of alien contact ever documented. This chilling incident involving 3 soldiers stationed at a highly secure Spanish airbase has left investigators and UFO enthusiasts saying, "What the fuck?" for decades. It wasn't just a random sighting of mysterious lights in the sky. Hell no. The event unfolded with terrifying intensity, ultimately leaving one soldier temporarily paralyzed and blinded by an unseen force. What happened that night remains one of Spain's most compelling UFO mysteries. On the night of November 12, 1976, Talavera La Real Air Force Base in Badajoz, located near the border with Portugal, became the epicenter of a bizarre and unexplainable phenomenon. As the soldiers carried out their routine patrols, they suddenly encountered something that defied everything they knew. What began as a strange disturbance soon escalated into a series of events that left the soldiers and the military scrambling for answers. The gravity of the situation cannot be overstated. Talavera La Real was not just any location. It was a secure military airbase with personnel trained to handle extremely fucked up situations. Security was tight. The soldiers on duty were highly trained professionals, and yet they found themselves utterly unprepared for what they witnessed that night. The involvement of military personnel lent an air of credibility and seriousness to the event, further intensifying the intrigue surrounding this encounter. What makes the Badajoz UFO incident even more significant is its connection to a larger wave of UFO sightings that gripped Spain during the 1970s. Across the country, reports of unidentified flying objects, strange lights, and unexplainable shit were on the rise. The atmosphere at the time was thick with tension and mystery, as both the public and government agencies had a tough time explaining these weird-ass encounters. Against this backdrop of heightened UFO activity, the events at Talavera La Real Air Force Base only deepened the fear and speculation surrounding extraterrestrial contact. What truly transpired on that fateful night? The answers remain elusive, but the questions have never faded. The mid to late 1970s in Spain saw a shitload of UFO sightings, captivating both the public and government authorities. Reports flooded in from all corners of the country, with witnesses ranging from ordinary civilians to highly trained professionals, including airline pilots. These sightings varied from mysterious lights in the sky to more dramatic experiences involving close encounters with unidentified flying objects. UFO fever gripped the nation, and these phenomena were talked about constantly by the media and the public. The sheer number of reports during this short period led many folks to figure something extraordinary was happening in the skies over Spain. Among these sightings, a particularly unsettling pattern emerged: a wave of humanoid encounters. Unlike many UFO sightings, which were usually just distant lights or vague shapes, these reports involved close-up encounters with strange, often humanoid beings. Witnesses described figures that ranged from small, childlike beings to tall, more menacing motherfuckers. The Talavera La Real incident fits into this category, as soldiers at the base claim to have seen a humanoid figure in the midst of their encounter. These reports added an entirely new layer of mystery and fear to the already freaky UFO phenomenon. It's important to remember the broader historical context during which these sightings occurred. The 1970s were a time of intense geopolitical tension, with the Cold War at its height. Spain, despite being relatively neutral in the global struggle between the US and the Soviet Union, was not immune to these pressures. Military secret was paramount, and heightened surveillance of aerial threats was a constant concern, especially around strategic locations like air bases. With such an air of paranoia, it became damn near impossible to tell the difference between potential foreign military threats and aliens flopping around. This tense geopolitical environment may have contributed to the initial reactions to UFO sightings. Most folks were afraid the unexplained phenomenon was foreign spycraft or experimental technology. Air bases like Talavera La Real became central to the UFO narrative during this period. These high-security locations were often the site of UFO encounters. This led some to figure that the event was connected to military activity. Theories ranged from secret government projects to extraterrestrial entities drawn to the base's strategic importance. With constant aerial surveillance and highly trained personnel tasked with monitoring the skies, these locations were uniquely positioned to detect any unusual activity. The fact that many of the most credible UFO sightings are on military bases gives it some sack. This combination of increased sightings, humanoid encounters, and a fraught geopolitical landscape created an atmosphere of fear and speculation in 1970s Spain, an era that remains pivotal in the history of UFO phenomena. The incident unfolded at 1:45 a.m. when two Spanish soldiers, Jose Maria Trejo and Juan Carrizosa Lujan, were on sentry duty at the fuel storage area. They were each in a sentry box about 200 feet apart. Out of nowhere, they heard a strange sound that immediately caught their attention. They described it as, at first, sounding like typical radio interference, which quickly changed to an acute, penetrating whistle that was so piercing it caused a shitload of pain in their ears. Each was now on alert to the real possibility of an intruder attempting sabotage, and so they readied their weapons and began to scan their surroundings. The whistling sound continued for around 5 minutes before coming to a stop. Worried there was an intruder attempting to access the fuel stock zone, Jose called over to Juan to help him search the area. After a brief search, nothing out of the ordinary was found and no signs of a breach of security, so they returned to their stations. Only moments after this patrol was carried out, the bizarre whistling sound began once more. This time, it sounded closer to Jose. They described this second whistling as being so sharp and so penetrating that they feared it would drive them mad or that their eardrums were going to be ruptured. Again, the ear-piercing whistling sound continued for about 5 minutes before mercifully stopping. They had no idea where it was coming from. This time, however, when the sound came to a stop, a bright light that looked like a bright rod was immediately visible overhead, lighting up a large part of the ground below. This unnerving glow lasted for around 20 to 30 seconds before it vanished, sending the area back into the darkness of the early morning hours. Shortly after that, a third sentry, Jose Hidalgo, and his guard dog joined the two soldiers. He had also just saw the magnificent glow and felt it was necessary to search the perimeter. The two soldiers agreed and joined him. They walked along the boundary wall in the darkness, watching the skies closely. They made their way to a small house where the guards and the corporal slept. They woke Corporal Pavone to inform him of the potential situation unfolding. He called for additional guards to help them sweep the base. He immediately ordered the 3 sentries to do a full search of the area in question. As the 3 men set out, the entire area was completely silent and still. The search was quiet and uneventful. In fact, the 3 soldiers took a certain amount of solace from the fact that the guard dog was calm and far from worked up. However, as they were approaching a sentry box under construction, things changed. They noticed a whirlwind of sorts began around them, bizarrely only seeming to affect the area where the soldiers stood. The sudden wind made them reach for and ready their rifles. They each stood as still as possible, their eyes darting around the area for signs of an intruder. Then they heard the sound of breaking eucalyptus branches up ahead. They unleashed the guard dog, who immediately ran toward the area where the noise came from. The soldiers waited, watched the area the dog had run to, expecting to hear barks and snarls when it located whoever or whatever had made the sound. However, all they heard was silence. A short time later, the dog came back to the group with his head down and he was whining. The men immediately noticed how the animal appeared spooked or frightened and appeared to stagger as though it was seasick. They would eventually manage to coax the guard dog into investigating the area 4 or 5 more times. Each time it would come back to the men. His ears seemed to be hurting and he was whimpering. He eventually began circling around the men, which is something guard dogs have been trained to do to indicate danger nearby, placing himself between the soldiers and whatever the hell he encountered in the trees. Needless to say, all 3 men were fucking bricking it at this point. After several moments of staring at each other dumbfounded, one of the soldiers hollered out in an attempt to get a response from whoever was hiding in the shadows. By this point, the guard dog began to get increasingly agitated and snarled at the unseen presence while continuing to circle the three soldiers. Then, things got utterly unreal. Suddenly, Trejo experienced a bizarre sensation that there was someone behind him. In fact, he was so spooked that cold shivers went right through his stomach. At the same time, he noticed the glow of a green light in his left side peripheral vision. Automatically, he turned to face the green glow. In front of him, at the height of around 10 feet tall, was a humanoid figure at around 30 feet away in front of an adobe wall. At this point, the other two soldiers had also turned to face the colossal being. One of them would later recall that the strange figure seemed to be made up of many different small points of light. They would further describe it as having extremely long arms that were crossed and a small head in comparison to its spindle-shaped body. It also appeared to wear some kind of a helmet. Although all of the soldiers were sure the figure was on the ground, none could recall seeing its feet or legs. It was almost as if its lower body was without legs. Trejo, who was by far the closest to the figure, was at first unable to move through shock and fear. Then, after gathering his thoughts, he raised his rifle and prepared to shoot. However, before he could pull the trigger, he found himself unable to move. What's more, a piercing weakness permeated his body. He would later recall that this sensation only began when he tried to pull the trigger of his gun. It was almost as if he would suggest later that the being had guessed my intentions. He felt himself falling to the ground. Before he did so, he shouted out to his fellow soldiers, "Down! They'll kill us!" With that, Trejo fell face first to the ground, now unable to speak and having problems seeing. As Trejo lay unmoving, face down on the ground, the two remaining soldiers opened fire on the glowing humanoid. They later estimated they unleashed between 40 and 50 shots between them. However, shortly after opening fire, the two men looked on in amazement as the figure simply vanished into thin air. One of them described it like the fading out of an image on a television screen. Within moments, the figure had simply vanished. Once the entity had gone, Carrizosa and Hidalgo rushed toward Trejo to check on him. As they did so, the strange, ear-piercing whistle sounded out once more, this time only lasting for around 15 seconds. Then, complete silence took over. Although he was largely unhurt, Trejo had an intense bruising type of pain in his chest, despite not having fallen on it or being struck there. This lasted for about 20 minutes before easing off and stopping altogether. By this time, almost the entire base, along with the backup guards the colonel requested, had heard the soldiers' rifle shots. Several soldiers had rushed outside their barracks, now ready to confront the intruder that gained entry to the base. The three sentries did their best to explain what had happened, but most of their fellow soldiers thought they were full of shit. An investigation was launched, and that's when shit got really spooky. As soon as the sun was up, several hours later, a unit of around 50 men conducted a thorough search of the entire area. However, not only was no evidence of the entity's presence found, but not a single shell casing was discovered in the area the soldiers had fired their weapons. Given that they fired around 50 shots, at least one, if not several, should have been found. In fact, they should have been all over the fucking place. And later, gunpowder residue analysis of the men's submachine guns proved that they had indeed been fired very recently. Kinda unnecessary, don't you think? I mean, they already woke up the entire base when they fired the shots anyway. To add to the weird shit was the fact that not a single bullet mark was discovered in the wall behind where the big bright boy stood. Although many of the shots should have hit the target, both soldiers who were unleashing hell on this fucking thing were certain that at least some of the barrage would have hit the wall. They were shooting standard issue Z-62 submachine guns. They're not exactly known for their pinpoint accuracy. Now, most of the time, that's where the fuckery stops. But this is no ordinary report. Several days later, more mysterious events unfolded. Several days after the incident, Trejo's vision got really bad. So much so that he could barely see. He was transferred to the military hospital building on base, where he laid largely unresponsive for around 24 hours. At first, it appeared as though he was recovering and was discharged from sickbay. However, less than a week later, he relapsed with his sudden ill health and was transferred to the local Badajoz hospital. He stayed there for 10 days while doctors conducted several tests and examinations on him. These ranged from eye and hearing tests to blood and stool samples and various x-rays. Nothing out of the ordinary was found. He was eventually discharged from the hospital and returned to duty. After several days, though, the mysterious illness returned, beginning with him losing his sight again. Although his vision would fully return, the overpowering shitty feeling didn't leave him, and he was eventually, on November 30th, transferred to Hospital del Aire, the Air Force hospital in Madrid. Many similar examinations and procedures were carried out on Trejo during this time at the hospital. However, just like before, doctors could find nothing physically wrong with him other than a nervous maladjustment, most likely due to the terrifying encounter in the early hours that November morning. After a month, he was released again. This time, it appeared that whatever had been fucking with him, at least in terms of his physical health, was over. Understandably, his mental health was a different issue. Why, hell, you think? Ultimately, the soldiers were mystified as to what they witnessed that night, but they were certain that all three of us saw it, adding that the thing was something very much like a man, but very tall. As for the military report on the incident, researcher Vicente Juan Balesta Almos has stated that the episode was never considered by the commander of the base as a UFO-type event. Instead, the event has all the traces of hallucinatory delirium by a person with a psychiatric history, combined with contagious hysteria, fear, and confusion. And yet, along with there being no suggestion of psychiatric history, the three men also had no doubt whatsoever about what they had seen at the time, boldly going on the record to state that the thing had been clearly seen by all three of them. In their minds, there were no hallucinations and no delirium. The events and what was behind them remain a complete mystery. as do such details as to what happened to the cartridge cases and why there were no bullet marks in the wall behind Lightbright Man. As investigator Benitez writes in his summary of the case, there are many similar cases on record where figures have appeared, generally of a human form, presenting a totally non-material appearance and with an intense, luminous radiation around them. Decades later, the Badajoz UFO incident remains shrouded in mystery. The questions are numerous and continue to puzzle researchers and UFO enthusiasts alike. What was the humanoid figure that appeared in front of the soldiers? How could it immobilize a trained, fully armed soldier, leaving him helpless and unable to move? What affliction did Trejos catch when the bright figure appeared? What was the ear-piercing sounds they kept hearing? Why was their guard dog signaling danger? What was the bright bar of light in the sky that projected on the ground? Why were there no shell casings, pockmarks, or even bullets found when their rifles had obviously been fired? And perhaps the biggest mystery, where did this alien fucker manage to vanish without a trace, leaving no material evidence to support what had clearly been a terrifying encounter for those soldiers? The lack of any physical proof has only deepened the mystery surrounding this case. In a highly secure military zone, where every goddamn detail is always accounted for, this absence of evidence is massively fucked up, making the event even more difficult to explain. The Badajoz UFO incident is not an isolated case either. During the 1970s, Spain was experiencing a wave of UFO sightings and humanoid encounters, with reports coming from civilians, military personnel, and even airline pilots. The similarities between these sightings and the events at the airbase raised the possibility that the incident was part of a broader, likely extraterrestrial phenomenon. As more and more cases emerged, it became crystal fucking clear that something strange was afoot across Spain during this period. Yet, despite years of investigation and speculation, the truth behind the Badajoz UFO incident remains elusive. Was this simply a case of mistaken identity? Or did the soldiers truly witness something from another world? Without definitive evidence, we may never know for certain. But as long as the questions remain, the incident will continue to captivate and haunt those searching for the truth behind this bizarre encounter. The events of that night still want for answers, and until they come, this encounter will be added to the many records of unexplained phenomena. If you vibed with this video, don't forget to tap that like button and subscribe. That way you won't miss out on more of my strange shit. Plus, I really appreciate it. I've also got some kick-bucking-ass merch, personally designed by yours truly. The link's in the description. I've got Scarinator t-shirts and tanks, Stay Creepy mugs, t-shirts, stickers, and all kinds of badass stuff. Until next time, y'all keep it real, keep it chill, and stay creepy! Catch you on the flip. Thank you for watching and listening until the very end. You kicked total ass.